Can you imagine a world where a dragonfly could rival a hawk in size? Or walking into a forest and coming face to face with a millipede larger than yourself? As unbelievable as it may sound, that world once existed. Dear time traveler, today we journey into a remarkable chapter of Earth's history. More than 300 million years ago, when vast forests covered the continents and the air was so rich in oxygen that it allowed certain creatures to grow to astonishing sizes. During this era, fascinating beings ruled the ecosystems. Creatures like Meganeura, a prehistoric dragonfly with wings spanning more than half a meter, slicing through the skies as a relentless aerial hunter. Or Arthropleura, a giant millipede nearly 3 meters long, roaming the forest floors of the Carboniferous Period and leaving behind fossil traces that still amaze scientists today. But what forces drove the rise of these giant invertebrates? Why was this chapter of Earth's history so unique? Prepare to step into a forgotten world where the atmosphere, vegetation, and evolution came together to give rise to an age of giant insects. And as we get ready to embark on this extraordinary journey through deep time, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what comes next. Our journey begins long before the age of giant winged arthropods, taking us back to the early Carboniferous period, around 359 million years ago. At that time, the continents were arranged in a configuration vastly different from the one we know today. The southern hemisphere was dominated by the supercontinent Gondwana, a massive landform that included what are now South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India. In the northern hemisphere, the collision of the continents Laurentia and Baltica had given rise to Laurasia, a precursor to much of modern North America and Eurasia. These land masses were far from static. They were in constant motion, driven by the immense and slow forces of plate tectonics. During this time, the planet was a crucible of geological activity. The Variscan, or Hercynian, orogeny, a monumental episode of continental collision, was at its peak. These collisions were not gentle encounters. They were epic clashes between continental plates, raising vast mountain ranges such as the Appalachians in North America and the Ural Mountains in Eurasia, which towered dramatically over the landscape. Imagine mountains so immense that their peaks seemed to pierce the sky, reshaping the global climate by altering wind and precipitation patterns and influencing ocean currents that redistributed heat across the planet. The erosion of these newly formed mountain chains also released nutrients into the oceans, profoundly affecting marine life. The overall climate of the early Carboniferous was predominantly warm and humid, a striking contrast to the glacial conditions that had dominated earlier periods. Extensive equatorial regions were blanketed by vast swampy rainforests, ecosystems that would become the cradle of an unprecedented explosion of biodiversity. Earth's atmosphere at that time was radically different from today's. Carbon dioxide concentrations were significantly higher, possibly 10 to even 15 times greater than modern levels. This contributed to a strong greenhouse effect that kept global temperatures elevated. But where did all this carbon dioxide come from? The primary source was intense and prolonged volcanic activity, which continuously released gases into the atmosphere through fissures and active volcanoes. Yet a gradual but profound transformation was underway. The rise and unchecked expansion of terrestrial vegetation began to reshape the planet. Plants, which had already colonized land during earlier periods, underwent an extraordinary evolutionary expansion throughout the Carboniferous. The earliest forests were dominated by plant groups that appear almost alien to us today. Giant lycopsides such as Lepidodendron and Sigillaria rose up to 40 meters tall, their trunks covered in distinctive scale-like patterns. Tree-sized horsetails, known as calamites, formed dense stands, while a wide variety of tree ferns created a thick and luxuriant understory. These trees bore no flowers and produced no fruit, yet they formed forests so dense that sunlight barely reached the forest floor, creating dark, humid, and perpetually shadowed environments. Alongside them grew chordates, tall tree-like relatives of modern conifers, as well as diverse seed ferns, adding further complexity to these ancient ecosystems. Through photosynthesis on a massive and unprecedented scale, these plants began pumping enormous quantities of oxygen into the atmosphere while simultaneously drawing down carbon dioxide. This vast removal of carbon, a process scientists now refer to as the Great Carbon Burial, unfolded slowly but relentlessly. Billions of tons of carbon were extracted from the atmosphere and locked away in the organic matter of dead plants. Instead of decomposing and returning their carbon to the air, much of this biomass sank into swampy environments, submerged and deprived of oxygen, preventing complete decay. This immense accumulation of undecomposed plant material eventually gave rise to the vast coal deposits that lend the Carboniferous Period its name. The soils were rich in organic matter, and rivers meandered through these lush landscapes, transporting nutrients and creating intricate networks of wetlands with characteristic waterlogged soils, ideal for fossil preservation. This transformation of Earth's atmosphere and geography laid the groundwork for the emergence of creatures that, to us today, would seem truly monstrous. As the Carboniferous progressed into its middle phase, the accumulation of oxygen in the atmosphere reached unprecedented levels. Around 300 million years ago, atmospheric oxygen concentrations may have climbed to an astonishing 35% compared to the 21% we breathe today. This raises a fascinating question. How did this super oxygen-rich air affect life on Earth? And more specifically, how did it allow insects and other arthropods to reach such extraordinary sizes? This dramatic rise in oxygen had profound implications for the physiology of life, especially for arthropods. Insects, unlike vertebrates, which rely on lungs and a complex circulatory system with hemoglobin to efficiently transport oxygen throughout the body, possess a fundamentally different respiratory system. Their system is based on a network of branching tubes known as tracheae. These tracheae open to the outside through small openings called spiracles and branch internally into ever finer tracheoles that penetrate directly into the tissues and cells of the insect, delivering oxygen straight to where it is needed. Oxygen moves passively from the air through these tubes and diffuses directly into each cell. Passive diffusion is an efficient process over short distances, but its effectiveness decreases dramatically as distance increases. In modern insects, living in today's lower oxygen atmosphere, this biophysical limitation is the primary factor that restricts their size. For a large insect in the present-day atmosphere, the distance oxygen must travel from the spiracles to the innermost cells of the body would simply be too great for efficient diffusion, causing internal tissues to suffocate from oxygen deprivation. But during the Carboniferous, in an environment with a much higher partial pressure of oxygen, this diffusion process became significantly more efficient. Insects could obtain enough oxygen to fuel their metabolic processes, even when their bodies reached considerable sizes. The limitation that restrains gigantism today was greatly reduced, opening the door to a remarkable increase in body size. It was as if the very air itself had become a more powerful fuel. Beyond oxygen availability, the warm and stable temperatures of the Carboniferous also played a crucial role. While higher metabolic rates often demand more oxygen, the extreme abundance of this gas allowed insects to sustain large bodies and high levels of activity, even in warm climates. This combination of heat and oxygen not only made respiration easier, but also provided the metabolic energy required to support massive muscle tissue and the constant exertion of larger creatures. Equally important was the absence of large vertebrate aerial predators. Birds and bats had not yet evolved, and the earliest reptiles and amphibians were only beginning to diversify. Competition for resources and the risks of aerial predation were dramatically different from those of later eras. The vast swamp forests did more than enrich the atmosphere with oxygen. They also provided an almost inexhaustible supply of food. The constant decay of plant matter, combined with the proliferation of fungi and other microorganisms, created a rich and abundant ecosystem capable of sustaining enormous insect populations. These warm, humid environments, filled with dense vegetation and countless ecological niches, promoted rapid diversification among insects. Evolution, unfolding within a context of abundance and favorable conditions, accelerated. New forms emerged, and most strikingly, new sizes. The combination of extremely high oxygen levels, limitless food resources, and the relative absence of efficient aerial predators created an evolutionary sweet spot for arthropods, paving the way for the rise of the true giants of air and land. It stands as a powerful reminder of how environmental conditions can sculpt life in ways that today seem almost unimaginable. With the environmental stage perfectly set, life, in its relentless drive to explore new frontiers and take full advantage of exceptional conditions, was quick to respond. It was during this era of oxygen abundance and vast vegetation that the Meganeurids emerged as the undisputed rulers of the Carboniferous skies. Can you imagine the shock, the sheer disbelief, if early explorers had been able to witness a dragonfly with a wingspan comparable to that of an eagle? This group of insects, now completely extinct, included the famous Meganeura moni, widely regarded as the largest flying insect that ever lived, boasting an astonishing wingspan of up to 75 centimeters. To put this into a more familiar perspective, that is comparable to the size of a peregrine falcon, or, as mentioned earlier, even a modern golden eagle. Meganeura, often mistakenly described as a giant dragonfly, was in fact a primitive relative, belonging to an extinct order known as Meganeura. Its resemblance to modern dragonflies lies in its overall body plan: an elongated body, large eyes, and membranous wings. Those wings, finely veined and delicately structured, were not only enormous, but also enabled agile and powerful flight, despite its colossal size. Aerodynamic studies suggest that, unlike modern dragonflies which can move their wings independently, Meganeurids likely moved all four wings in a coordinated manner, generating tremendous lift and propulsion. Their long, segmented bodies were perfectly adapted for aerodynamic efficiency, allowing them to slice through the air with minimal resistance. Their large compound eyes, which occupied a substantial portion of the head, provided an exceptional field of vision approaching 360 degrees, a critical advantage for hunting in dense, life-filled environments. These were not herbivorous creatures. They were agile and voracious predators, stalking smaller insects and even targeting early amphibians and juvenile reptiles that dared to venture near the edges of the swamps. The elevated oxygen levels of the Carboniferous did more than simply make breathing easier. They ensured that these massive bodies received sufficient metabolic fuel, while also supporting the enormous muscle mass required for sustained flight. This allowed Meganeura and its relatives to patrol vast expanses of Carboniferous forests, reigning supreme as true lords of the air. But gigantism was not limited to the skies. The land itself was also home to arthropod creatures of colossal proportions, forcing us to rethink everything we thought we knew about the size limits of insects. The Carboniferous was an age in which size was not a constraint, but an evolutionary advantage for many arthropods, allowing them to dominate both land and air in a true symphony of gigantism. Other groups of insects also experienced remarkable growth. The Paleodictyopterans, an extinct order of winged insects that possessed an additional smaller pair of wings on the thorax, reached impressive sizes as well. While not as large as Meganeura, some species displayed wingspans of up to 20 or even 30 centimeters, which is still extraordinary for an insect. These creatures inhabited dense forests of giant lycopsids and tree ferns, flying through the tangled vegetation and forming part of a complex and interconnected food web. Primitive cockroaches, although either flightless or capable of only limited flight, also thrived in this warm and humid environment, reaching sizes far larger than their modern relatives. Adapted to life on the forest floor and within swampy environments, where they acted as scavengers and detritivores, some fossil cockroaches, such as Archimolacris, have been found with body lengths of up to 10 centimeters. Imagine a cockroach of that size moving through the leaf litter, searching for decaying organic matter. But the true star among the giant terrestrial arthropods, a creature that would make anyone tremble if encountered today, was Arthropleura. Although not an insect in the strict sense, but rather an ancient myriapod, it was closely related to modern millipedes and centipedes, and it dominated the Carboniferous forest floor with an imposing presence. Arthropleura could reach astonishing lengths of more than 2 meters, with a body width exceeding 50 centimeters. Picture for a moment a centipede as long and robust as a small car, crawling across the forest floor, its hundreds of legs moving in coordinated waves. Fossils discovered in sites such as Joggins in Canada, as well as locations in Germany and the United States, reveal a segmented body covered by a thick, articulated exoskeleton. This structure suggests both formidable protection against potential predators and strong structural support for its enormous mass. Scientists have even uncovered fossilized trackways left behind by Arthropleura, providing direct and undeniable evidence of its colossal size and its distinctive mode of locomotion. These terrestrial giants are believed to have fed primarily on the abundant leaf litter and decaying vegetation, acting as key decomposers within the ecosystem. By breaking down organic matter on such a massive scale, they played a crucial role in nutrient recycling and contributed significantly to soil fertility. Other remarkable arthropods of the time included giant scorpions, such as Pulmonoscorpius, which could grow up to 70 centimeters in length, becoming formidable predators on the forest floor, armed with powerful pincers and venomous stingers. Primitive spiders, while not as large as the scorpions or Arthropleura, were still considerably bigger than many of their modern descendants, weaving webs among dense vegetation to trap unsuspecting prey or actively hunting through the shadowy understory. The Carboniferous was, without question, an era in which arthropod life pushed the boundaries of size, creating a world where the small and the monstrous coexisted in a delicate and astonishing balance. The landscape of the late Carboniferous, roughly between 300 and 290 million years ago, was a spectacle of life and exuberance. Swampy rainforests sustained by a warm, humid climate and still elevated levels of carbon dioxide remained the dominant ecosystems, especially across the vast equatorial regions of the planet. These immense plant communities were not only home to the giant insects and myriapods we have described, but also to a growing diversity of vertebrate life that was taking its first confident steps on land, marking a monumental evolutionary milestone. Amphibians, the the first vertebrates to colonize terrestrial environments, had undergone remarkable diversification. Many were large-bodied animals, well adapted to life in swamps and waterways. Species such as Archaeops, a robust temnospondyle, reaching lengths of up to 2 meters and bearing a massive, heavy skull, hunted in wetlands and along riverbanks. With powerful jaws and sharp teeth, they were formidable predators in aquatic and semi-aquatic environments, ambushing fish, other amphibians, and even small reptiles or large insects that ventured too close to the water. Other amphibian groups, such as the disaurifids, began to explore more terrestrial niches, although they still depended on water for reproduction, laying their eggs in aquatic environments. At the same time, the first reptiles were beginning their rise. This was a true evolutionary revolution. These animals were adapting to drier environments thanks to key innovations: a tougher, scaly skin that reduced water loss far more effectively than that of amphibians, and the development of the amniotic egg. This type of egg, with its internal membranes, including the amnion, chorion, and allantois, along with a protective shell, contained everything necessary for embryonic development outside of water. This allowed reptiles to reproduce far from bodies of water, a critical advantage in a world where swamps, though widespread, did not cover the entire landscape. These early reptiles represented a new evolutionary frontier, even though at this stage they were still relatively small compared to their later Mesozoic descendants, such as the dinosaurs. The forest understory of these Carboniferous jungles was alive with activity, filled with arthropods of every kind: giant scorpions, primitive spiders larger than most modern species, and countless other insects formed an intricate web of life operating across multiple levels. From decomposers to apex predators, every organism played a role within this complex ecological tapestry. The interactions among these groups were dynamic and deeply interconnected. Meganeurids patrolled the skies, their membranous wings humming as they hunted other insects and possibly small amphibians. Amphibians, armed with powerful jaws and capable of operating both in water and on land, lurked along the edges of rivers and swamps, ready to ambush any creature that strayed too close. Giant myriapods, such as Arthropleura, crawled across the forest floor, breaking down plant material and fueling the nutrient cycle, while remaining alert to emerging terrestrial reptiles and other predators. Life in the Carboniferous stands as a striking example of how a planet with unique environmental conditions can give rise to forms of life that today seem almost cinematic. Can you imagine the sounds of that primordial forest? The deep buzz of giant dragonflies overhead, the splash of amphibians slipping into dark waters, and the rhythmic crunch of Arthropleura's many legs moving through the leaf litter. It was an echo from a world where gigantism was the rule for many of its inhabitants, an era of abundance and colossal proportions. A unique ecosystem, vibrant, complex, and constantly evolving. We have spoken about the vast swamp forests of the Carboniferous, but it is crucial to understand the peculiar feature that made them so unique and so fundamental to the rise of insect gigantism. Imagine a world where fallen trees did not fully decompose. It sounds strange, does it not? Yet that was the reality of Carboniferous forests. At that time, life on Earth was evolving rapidly, but not all the key players had yet arrived. Plants had developed the complex molecule lignin, which gave them the structural rigidity needed to grow into massive trees. However, the microorganisms and fungi that today are highly efficient at breaking down lignin were either not yet widespread or not yet effective. As a result, when a giant lepidodendron or calamites collapsed into a swamp, its woody tissues did not completely decay. Instead, They accumulated layer upon layer beneath stagnant, oxygen-poor waters, a process that continued for millions of years. This phenomenon, known as the Great Carbon Burial, was the driving force behind the massive accumulation of organic material that we now know as coal. Every coal mine on Earth is a time capsule, a preserved remnant of these primordial forests. This accumulation not only formed the fossil fuel that would power the industrial age, but also had a profound impact on the atmosphere. Because this wood did not fully decompose, its carbon was not returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Instead, it was locked away on a massive scale. This created a powerful imbalance. While photosynthesis continued to produce oxygen in enormous quantities, the reabsorption of carbon through decomposition was severely limited. The result was a steady and dramatic rise in atmospheric oxygen, eventually reaching the astonishing 35% that allowed insects to grow to monumental sizes. It was a unique feedback loop. Forests produced oxygen, and their inability to fully decompose amplified that effect, creating an oxygen-enriched world for both aerial and terrestrial giants, a true breeding ground for the colossal. However, as in every evolutionary and geological saga, rains are never eternal, and conditions never remain unchanged. The dominance of giant insects and other arthropods, particularly the Meganeurids and Arthropleura, began to decline toward the end of the Carboniferous and into the early Permian, around 299 million years ago. The primary driver of this transformation was a fundamental shift in Earth's atmosphere and global climate, ironically triggered by the very life forms that had once flourished under those conditions. The relentless photosynthetic activity of the vast Carboniferous forests had removed enormous quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at an unprecedented rate. This massive reduction in atmospheric carbon dioxide, which at the time was the planet's principal greenhouse gas, led to a significant weakening of Earth's natural greenhouse effect. As a result, global temperatures began to fall, ushering in a period of global cooling known as the Late Paleozoic Ice Age, or the Permo-Carboniferous glaciation. Extensive ice sheets formed across the polar regions of the supercontinent Gondwana, causing a dramatic global drop in sea level, in some periods by as much as 100 meters, as vast amounts of water became locked away in polar glaciers. This cooling trend, combined with progressive global drying, had severe consequences for swamp-based ecosystems. As climates became cooler and drier across many regions, the expansive forests that had defined the Carboniferous began to shrink and fragment, giving way to more seasonal and arid environments. The swamp forests, which were essential not only for coal formation, but also for maintaining exceptionally high atmospheric oxygen levels, were particularly affected. As these ecosystems declined in extent and vitality, net oxygen production at a planetary scale dropped significantly, perhaps most critically for the fate of giant insects and myriapods. Atmospheric oxygen concentrations began to fall. While the exact values remain the subject of scientific debate and are derived from complex geochemical models and isotopic evidence, estimates suggest that oxygen levels may have declined from their peak of around 35% to values closer to, or even below, modern levels, likely in the range of 20 to 25%. This reduction in oxygen delivered a direct and devastating blow to giant arthropods, imposing an uncompromising biophysical limit. The tracheal respiratory system that had enabled their enormous size under oxygen-rich conditions now became an insurmountable constraint. According to Fick's law of gas diffusion, the rate of diffusion is directly proportional to surface area, the diffusion coefficient, and the concentration gradient, and inversely proportional to the distance the gas must travel. In an environment with reduced oxygen availability, the concentration gradient between external air and the insect's internal tissues drops sharply. As a consequence, oxygen diffusion through the long tracheal systems of large bodies becomes increasingly inefficient and, critically, metabolically unsustainable. Simply put, these animals could no longer acquire enough oxygen to support their massive bodies, particularly for energetically demanding activities such as sustained flight in an insect with a wingspan of 75 centimeters. Smaller insects and myriapods with higher surface-to-volume ratios and much shorter diffusion distances were able to respire far more efficiently under these new, low-oxygen conditions. This granted them a decisive adaptive advantage. It was a powerful demonstration of how environmental change can favor or eliminate specific evolutionary traits, acting as an unforgiving selective force and redefining the limits of body size for life on Earth. The great experiment of gigantism had come to an end. The decline in oxygen levels and the onset of global cooling were not the only forces that sealed the fate of giant insects. Another crucial factor, and perhaps the final blow to their aerial dominance, was the rise and diversification of new vertebrate predators. During the Permian, the period that followed the Carboniferous, reptile evolution underwent an extraordinary radiation of forms and adaptations. With their scaly skin, far more resistant to dehydration, and the revolutionary ability to lay amniotic eggs on land, these animals were far better suited to the increasingly dry environments that replaced the vast Carboniferous swamps. Imagine a world where life was beginning to conquer every corner of the landscape, even places that had once been inhospitable to vertebrates, and how that would forever shift the balance of power. Within this reptilian diversification, one lineage in particular began to explore a niche that had previously been almost exclusive to insects: the air. The first forms capable of gliding, or of very early stages of flight, began to appear, still far from the aerodynamic efficiency that birds or pterosaurs would achieve millions of years later. One especially fascinating example is Coelurosaurus, a small diapsid reptile from the late Permian that evolved a highly unusual gliding apparatus. These were not wings supported by bones and feathers like those of birds, nor membranes stretched between elongated fingers as in pterosaurs. Instead, Coelurosaurus possessed long bony extensions projecting from its ribs, which supported a membrane of skin. This structure allowed it to glide between trees in a manner remarkably similar to that of modern flying squirrels. These early aerial vertebrates, though likely less agile or powerful in sustained flapping flight than the Meganeurids, represented a new and growing threat. Their presence introduced an entirely new selective pressure into the ecosystem. They were vertebrates with more complex nervous systems, larger brains, and binocular vision, providing superior depth perception for hunting. They began to actively exploit aerial niches, competing for resources and, crucially, preying on insects. Even if their flight abilities were primitive compared to the refined aerial mastery of a Meganeura, their mere existence posed a significant danger to giant insects that had previously enjoyed relative dominance of the skies. Imagine being a 75-centimeter Meganeura, already struggling with a metabolism constrained by declining oxygen levels, and now having to contend with a new vertebrate predator, agile, intelligent, and hunting within your own aerial territory. The stage was set for a new era of aerial predation, a true evolutionary arms race. The diversification of amphibians also played a role, though a less direct one in aerial competition. While many amphibians suffered from climatic drying and the loss of swampy habitats, those that managed to adapt to drier conditions or evolved more terrestrial lifestyles, such as disaurophids, with more compact bodies suited to life away from water, became increasingly effective predators. These amphibians hunted insects on land and captured flying insects that ventured too close to the ground. In essence, both the sky and the forest floor were becoming far more dangerous places for giant arthropods. The combined pressure of predation, together with the physiological constraints imposed by declining oxygen levels, created an insurmountable evolutionary bottleneck. These conditions overwhelmingly favored smaller insects and arthropods. It was nature acting as an unforgiving selective force, rewarding those best adapted to the new and harsher realities, and leaving behind the colossal rulers of a long-vanished world. As the Permian progressed toward its end, around 252 million years ago, conditions for giant insects and arthropods had become unsustainable. The combined pressure of declining oxygen levels, climatic shifts toward increasing aridity, and growing competition from newly evolved vertebrate predators steadily eroded their dominance. Yet the final blow, the event that marked the definitive end of their era, came in the form of one of the most unimaginable catastrophes in the history of our planet, the Permian Triassic mass extinction. Often referred to as the Great Dying, this event wiped out the vast majority of life on Earth in a catastrophe without precedent, one that fundamentally rewrote the rules of survival. Can you imagine an extinction so devastating that it eliminated approximately 96% of all marine species and 75% of terrestrial vertebrate species? That was the scale of the Great Dying. The last Meganeurids, along with the majestic Arthropleura and countless other groups of giant insects and arthropods, were swept away. This global catastrophe was not a single sudden event, but the outcome of a lethal combination of interconnected processes. The primary trigger was the massive volcanic eruptions of the Siberian Traps, a vast volcanic province in what is now Russia. Over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, enormous volumes of lava were released, along with trillions of tons of gases injected into the atmosphere. These emissions included vast quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Carbon dioxide drove extreme global warming, reversing the earlier cooling trend of the Permian and pushing temperatures to lethal levels. Sulfur dioxide, reacting with atmospheric moisture, produced acid rain that devastated terrestrial vegetation and destabilized ecosystems already under immense stress. At the same time, global warming triggered widespread oceanic anoxia. Higher water temperatures reduced the solubility of oxygen in the oceans, while accelerating the metabolism of marine organisms, increasing their demand for oxygen beyond what was available. Vast oceanic dead zones formed, suffocating marine life on a planetary scale. The release of methane from oceanic clathrates, intensified by rising temperatures, may have acted as a powerful positive feedback loop, further amplifying the greenhouse effect and accelerating environmental collapse. The planet was undergoing changes so rapid and extreme that few forms of life could endure them. Ocean acidification, atmospheric poisoning, oxygen depletion, and extreme heat combined to create an almost apocalyptic scenario. This near-total reset of global biodiversity emptied ecological niches on an unprecedented scale, paving the way for the few surviving lineages to diversify during the geological periods that followed. It was an event that permanently reshaped the history of life on Earth. And with it, the age of giant arthropods came to a definitive close. Although insects managed to survive this mass extinction, demonstrating a remarkable resilience that has fascinated scientists for decades, those that emerged during the Triassic, the period that followed the Great Dying, were generally much smaller in size. The age of insect gigantism had come to an end. But why did insects of such enormous proportions never reappear in later eras, even during moments of the Mesozoic, when atmospheric conditions were relatively favorable? The answer is both crucial and revealing, and it lies in the continued evolution and increasing specialization of vertebrate aerial predators. With the rise and diversification of pterosaurs during the Triassic, birds in the Jurassic, and bats in the Cenozoic, the skies were transformed into a fiercely contested and highly dangerous domain for any large, slow-moving creature. Pterosaurs were the first truly flying vertebrates. They evolved complex membranous wings supported by a single elongated finger, achieving an unprecedented level of aerial agility. They were formidable predators of the air, capable of maneuvering and capturing prey with an efficiency that even the mighty Meganeura could never have matched. Later, birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs, developing feathers and an extraordinarily efficient respiratory system based on air sacs and a warm-blooded metabolism. This allowed for sustained, high-energy flight and access to higher altitudes. Finally, bats, flying mammals that emerged during the Cenozoic, perfected nocturnal flight and echolocation, adding yet another layer of sophistication to aerial predation. A large insect, such as a meganeurid, would have been an easy and highly visible target for these specialized predators. The evolutionary arms race had shifted dramatically. The new rules favored speed, camouflage, maneuverability, and escape ability over sheer body size. Insects, constrained by their tracheal respiratory systems and unable to develop the high metabolic rates and muscular power of flying vertebrates, simply could not achieve the same levels of efficiency, endurance, or sustained flight performance as their new competitors. As a result, they were pushed toward smaller body sizes, where agility, rapid reproduction, and the ability to hide became their most effective defenses. The extinction of the Carboniferous giants was not the end of arthropods, but rather a reconfiguration of their success. The Triassic, a period spanning from roughly 252 to 201 million years ago, was a vast canvas of resilience and reinvention for life on Earth. In the aftermath of the Great Dying, the planet did not recover overnight. Early Triassic climates were extremely hot and arid. The supercontinent Pangaea, now fully assembled, created immense continental interiors far from the moderating influence of the oceans, giving rise to vast deserts and strongly seasonal monsoonal climates in other regions. Yet, slowly, ecosystems began to stabilize, and life, driven by its innate persistence, found new pathways to survive and thrive. In this new world, insects, despite having lost their gigantic forms, demonstrated astonishing adaptability. Far from marking the end of their success, the mass extinction became a major evolutionary turning point. The ecological niches left vacant by the Great Dying were immense, offering unprecedented opportunities for diversification and innovation. And insects were ready to seize them. One of the most transformative innovations to become firmly established and to expand during the Triassic and later periods was complete metamorphosis, also known as holometabolism. This life cycle, involving 4 distinct and dramatically different stages, egg, larva, pupa, and adult, stands as a true masterpiece of evolution. Can you imagine living 4 different lives within a single lifetime? Its brilliance lies in several critical advantages. First, it reduces competition between life stages. The larva, often a specialized feeding and growth machine, and the adult, focused on reproduction and dispersal, exploit entirely different resources and ecological niches. A caterpillar feeds on leaves, while the adult butterfly drinks nectar. They do not compete for food, allowing far more efficient use of ecosystem resources. Second, it provides exceptional adaptability. The pupal stage allows for a complete reorganization of the body, enabling rapid adjustment to environmental or seasonal changes. It is a biological reset, from which the adult emerges with features very different from those of the larva, optimized for reproduction and dispersal. Third, it offers protection during development. The pupal stage, often immobile and enclosed within a cocoon or chrysalis, represents a period of reduced vulnerability while profound internal transformations take place. This holometabolous strategy proved decisive for the explosive success of groups such as beetles, flies and mosquitoes, butterflies and moths, and ants, bees, and wasps. These insect orders, which today dominate global insect diversity, began their major diversification during the Mesozoic. Beetles, for example, with their hardened exoskeletons and protected wings, adapted to an extraordinary range of diets and environments. Flies evolved agile flight and remarkable reproductive capacity. Although flowering plants had not yet come to dominate the landscape, their great radiation would occur later during the Cretaceous. Relationships between insects and gymnosperms, such as conifers and cycads, which were the dominant plants of the time, began to deepen. Insect-mediated pollination, though likely less specialized than in flowering plants, was already underway, and herbivorous insects continued to co-evolve with the flora of the era. While insects were reshaping their world at the microscopic scale, the Triassic also marked the dawn of a new megafauna. Dinosaurs, which would eventually dominate the planet, made their first appearance, though the earliest forms were relatively small and bipedal. The first mammals also emerged, tiny and nocturnal, living in the shadows of dominant reptiles. The skies, as we have seen, witnessed the rise of flying reptiles, sealing the end of aerial insect gigantism once and for all. In this rapidly changing world, small size became a virtue. It allowed insects to exploit tiny ecological niches, remain hidden from newly evolved vertebrate predators, and survive on fewer resources. Their fast life cycles and ability to adapt quickly to environmental change gave them a decisive advantage. The story of insects in the Triassic is one of survival through adaptation, diversification, and specialization, a story that planted the seeds of their extraordinary success in the modern world. The world changed dramatically once again around 66 million years ago, with the impact of an asteroid that marked the end of the Cretaceous period and the reign of the dinosaurs. This event, known as the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction, was another global catastrophe that fundamentally reshaped both terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Darkness caused by dust and aerosols suspended in the atmosphere blocked sunlight, triggering the collapse of photosynthesis, a sudden global cooling, and a widespread breakdown of food chains across the planet. While the dominant giant reptiles vanished almost entirely, with the exception of their avian descendants, insects once again demonstrated their extraordinary resilience. Why did they survive when much larger creatures perished? Their key biological traits played a decisive role. The small size of many insects meant they required far less food and could easily take refuge in microhabitats such as underground burrows, inside fallen logs, or beneath rocks, places that offered some protection from extreme environmental conditions. Their flexible metabolism provided another critical advantage, allowing many species to enter diapause, a dormant state similar to hibernation when conditions became hostile. This ability enabled them to endure prolonged periods of environmental stress until conditions improved. Added to this was their remarkable dietary diversity. While certain food sources temporarily disappeared, The sheer variety of insect species and feeding strategies meant that many groups could switch to alternative resources, such as carrion or decaying organic matter. Finally, their short life cycles and high reproductive rates allowed insect populations to rebound rapidly and recolonize ecosystems as soon as conditions began to stabilize during the Paleogene, the opening chapter of the Cenozoic era. Throughout the Cenozoic, spanning the last 66 million years to the present day, mammals and birds rose to fill the ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs. Paradoxically, the expansion of mammals and the continued success of flowering plants created even more opportunities for insects. New ecological roles emerged in association with mammals, including parasites, dung decomposers, and pollinators of plants that depended on large herbivores. Coevolution with flowering plants reached new heights, driving ongoing diversification and ever finer specialization. Insects adapted to inhabit nearly every corner of the planet, from glaciers to deserts, from forest canopies to deep underground soils. They evolved astonishing survival strategies, from near-perfect camouflage that renders them virtually invisible, to the production of potent venoms and chemical defenses, from solitary lifestyles to complex societies composed of millions of individuals. This seemingly limitless capacity for adaptation is what has made insects not the largest inhabitants of Earth, but the true numerical and functional dominators of terrestrial ecosystems. They are the invisible backbone that supports much of the life we see around us, and their story stands as a powerful testament to the relentless force of evolution. Today, insects no longer rule the skies with the wingspan of a Meganeura, nor dominate the land with the imposing mass of an Arthropleura. And yet, their success is undeniable and, in many ways, even more extraordinary in terms of numbers and global reach. Insects represent the most diverse class of animals on the planet, with millions of species already described and many more still waiting to be discovered. Scientific estimates vary, but they far exceed 5 million and may even surpass 10 million distinct species. They inhabit nearly every terrestrial and freshwater ecosystem on Earth, from the driest deserts and polar regions to mountain peaks and the depths of underground caves. Their capacity for adaptation is nothing short of astonishing, and it stands as one of the greatest survival stories in Earth's history. Their small size, once a limiting disadvantage for gigantism during eras of oxygen-rich air, has become a critical adaptive advantage in the modern world. It allows insects to exploit tiny ecological niches that are completely inaccessible to larger organisms. Imagine a beetle living comfortably inside a single seed, or a fruit fly completing its entire life cycle within a piece of decaying fruit. These strategies allow insects to evade larger predators with ease and to survive and reproduce while requiring far fewer individual resources. Equally important to their success are their rapid reproductive rates and short life cycles. These traits allow insects to respond quickly to environmental change, to develop resistance to new threats such as diseases, localized climate shifts, or human-made pressures like pesticides, and to evolve at remarkable speed under selective forces. A life cycle lasting only weeks or months allows natural selection to act far more rapidly than it can in organisms whose lifespans stretch across years. The influence of insects on terrestrial ecosystems is immense and often underestimated, despite their small size. They are essential pollinators for the majority of crops that feed humanity, and for countless wild plant species, ensuring the continuity of forests, grasslands, and agricultural systems. They serve as crucial decomposers, recycling organic matter that is vital for soil fertility by breaking down leaves, wood, and animal remains. Within food webs, insects form a foundational resource for a vast array of birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. At the same time, many insects are predators themselves, regulating populations of other insects and small invertebrates, and helping to maintain ecological balance. Without them, much of life on Earth, including our own, simply could not exist as we know it. In many ways, insects are the invisible backbone that supports terrestrial ecosystems. The history of Earth is, to a great extent, a history shaped by insects. Their ability to reinvent themselves, from colossal giants to small but astonishingly diverse forms, is a powerful testament to the relentless force of evolution and to their indispensable role within the intricate tapestry of life. For today's scientists, the study of giant insects from the Carboniferous and Permian is far more than a fascinating curiosity. It is an invaluable window into the complex mechanisms that govern the evolution of life on our planet. How is it possible that we know so much about creatures that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, known only from fragmentary fossils or ancient trackways? The answer lies in human ingenuity, scientific rigor, and the relentless persistence of research. Paleontology, through the analysis of fossils discovered in extraordinary sites, from the famous coal beds that gave the Carboniferous its name to delicate impressions preserved in sedimentary rocks, allows us to reconstruct not only the external appearance of these animals, but also to infer their ecology, behavior, and even aspects of their physiology. The fine vein patterns preserved in fossilized wings of giant insects reveal aerodynamic designs so sophisticated that modern engineers study them today for inspiration in drone technology. The robust mouthparts of other fossil insects point to highly specialized diets, and the trackways left behind by massive arthropods offer direct evidence of their imposing movement across ancient forest floors. It is like assembling a vast and intricate puzzle from pieces that time itself has tried to erase, yet which geology has, remarkably, preserved. Beyond the fossils themselves, geology and geochemistry play a fundamental role in reconstructing these lost worlds. The analysis of sedimentary rocks, carbon isotopes preserved in ancient marine deposits, and even microscopic air bubbles trapped within amber or salt crystals provide critical clues about atmospheric composition and global temperatures from deep time. It is this powerful combination of tangible fossil evidence and complex geochemical data that allows scientists to paint such a detailed and scientifically robust picture of a world so distant from our own. Science is a continuous process of investigation and debate, and every new discovery adds a vital piece to this extraordinary mosaic, sometimes challenging long-held assumptions and pushing the boundaries of what we thought we knew. The story of giant insects offers lessons that resonate powerfully to this day, extending far beyond the realm of paleontology. It reminds us of the profound and unbreakable interconnectedness between the atmosphere, climate, and life on Earth. The dramatic shifts in oxygen and carbon dioxide levels observed during the Carboniferous and Permian were not isolated events. They had sweeping consequences for biodiversity, favoring certain forms of life while condemning others, and permanently altering the evolutionary trajectory of our planet. At a time when our own world is facing significant and accelerating environmental change, rising global temperatures, shifts in atmospheric composition, and an alarming loss of biodiversity. Understanding how Earth responded to similar transformations in the past becomes critically important. The story of insect gigantism stands as a clear reminder that ecosystems are dynamic and constantly evolving, and that the conditions which favor particular species or groups can change suddenly and unpredictably, triggering complete reorganizations of life on Earth. The great natural experiment of the Carboniferous shows us that even changes that unfold slowly on geological timescales can produce catastrophic outcomes for life forms unable to adapt. Evolution does not guarantee stability. It rewards flexibility. Perhaps the most profound lesson of all is the extraordinary resilience of life itself. Despite mass extinctions that erased the vast majority of species, despite dramatic global climate shifts, and despite the rise of new competitors and predators, life on Earth has always found a way to persist, diversify, and ultimately flourish, though often in entirely new forms and under different evolutionary rules. The ability of insects to reinvent themselves, from the colossal giants of the deep past to the astonishing diversity and ubiquity they display today, stands as a powerful testament to that persistence. It reminds us that life is not static. It is a constant flow, an unending process of adaptation. The next time you see a dragonfly darting effortlessly above a pond, a spider weaving its intricate web at dawn, or a small ant tirelessly marching across the ground, take a moment to reflect on the extraordinary and ancient evolutionary story behind them. These creatures are the direct descendants of an age of giants, heirs to a lost world, a time when the air was different, the forests were unlike anything we know today, and beings we now consider small ruled the skies and the land with colossal size. Their journey through deep geological time is one of the most astonishing and revealing narratives our planet has to offer. It is a testament to how the invisible forces of Earth shape existence, and how life, at its core, is a symphony of adaptation and survival. They invite us to look at our own world with new eyes, to appreciate the delicate balance of biological systems, and to understand that even the smallest creature is a link in an evolutionary chain stretching back hundreds of millions of years. What other incredible stories lie hidden within the fossil record, waiting to be uncovered by human curiosity and scientific discovery, revealing even more about the astonishing past and uncertain future of life on Earth? Time, that vast canvas, continues to unveil its secrets, and with each new discovery, we move one step closer to understanding the profound wonder of existence. If you enjoyed this journey, remember to subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the mysteries of the past together. We will see you in the next Jurassic adventure.